The narrator of a story alters how readers perceive the story, and when a narrator is unreliable, that calls everything you think you know into question. Unreliable narrator has been a staple of the mystery and thriller genres since the days of Agatha Christie, and in today's video we are going to talk all about it, including what unreliable narrators are, why people like them, and how to use one effectively. Hello, my name is Jackie. I'm an agented author of historical mysteries, and in my series Mystery Trope Talk, I am breaking down popular tropes from mystery and thriller novels through the ages. Whether you are an amateur writer or just a mystery fan, I hope this video is helpful to you, and if it is, please do give it a big thumbs up and subscribe to my channel so you won't miss the next episode. Your likes and comments help me know how my content is resonating with my audience and what I should make more of. First things first, before we go any further, we have to discuss what is an unreliable narrator. I thought it would be a good exercise to look up the dictionary definition of unreliable. However, several dictionaries simply defined it as, quote, not reliable, unquote, which is not the most helpful definition. So let's look at the definition from the Cambridge Dictionary, which defines unreliable as, quote, not able to be trusted or believed. So in simple terms, an unreliable narrator is a narrator who cannot be trusted or believed. Their version of events in the novel is not entirely trustworthy. A narrator could be unreliable because they have a secret that they're concealing, they are misinterpreting the events of the story, or there are outside factors that are making them not able to trust their own judgment or memory. There are many mystery novels in which the narrator reveals later on in the book that, surprise, they are actually the guilty party all along, and throughout the entire novel, they have been using clever wordplay to conceal their guilt from the reader. Now, one thing I do want to say here really quickly is that I will not be outright spoiling any books in which the narrator is the guilty party because I don't want to inadvertently ruin a book for my viewers. So when you're in the comment section, please also be mindful of this. I would hate to ruin a really good book from somebody who hasn't read it yet. However, I will be discussing vague spoilers of unnamed books and also mentioning unreliable narrators who, while not the guilty party, are still unreliable for other reasons. So our next question is, why might a narrator be unreliable? And there are multiple reasons, including, first, deliberate deception. When people think of an unreliable narrator, this is typically what they think of. A narrator who has a secret they need to hide, such as, in a mystery, the fact that they're a murderer. And thus, they are going to present a very carefully constructed sequence of events to make the reader believe in their innocence. In this case, the narrator could be hiding key facts from the reader so that the reader will not suspect them. And sometimes in mysteries, narrators may not be the big bad murderer who's going to be unmasked at the end of the book, but they might have other deep dark secrets that they don't want the reader to know about, thus leading to their unreliability. However, not all unreliable narrators are trying to cover up their own guilt. And I think this is a common misconception about the term unreliable narrator, because not all unreliable narrators necessarily have the intent to deceive. Some unreliable narrators are unintentionally misleading. They genuinely believe that their version of events is the correct one, but later on in the book, you'll find out that the narrator genuinely misinterpreted things, and actually the truth is different. I recently did a reread of a non-mystery series, The Hunger Games, and one thing I talked about in that vlog is how Katniss is at times a sort of unreliable narrator because frequently her reads on people and her interpretation of their intentions is way off from the actual intentions. For example, in the first Hunger Games book, Katniss initially views Peeta's motivations as manipulative. She thinks that he is presenting a front to make himself appear more desirable to sponsors in the games, or to potentially paint himself as weak in front of the other tributes. Later, when the two of them start playing up a romantic connection for the cameras, she thinks that Peeta is just really good at acting. Spoiler alert, she is totally misjudging him. Peeta is actually just a legitimately very nice guy who's had a crush on Katniss his entire life. But if you were reading The Hunger Games for the very first time and you didn't know how the story was going to go, you might easily buy into Katniss's interpretation of Peeta's character and wonder yourself if he is secretly a manipulative person. She is not presenting this view of him because she wants to mislead the reader. She's doing it because this is what she genuinely believes at the time, and it's only later that she finds out she was wrong. Another type of unreliable narrator that you see frequently, especially in contemporary thrillers, is an unreliable narrator who is unreliable due to outside factors, such as substance abuse. A narrator who is struggling with drugs, alcohol, or mental illness may have a hard time telling what is real and what is not. If they blacked out, they may not remember if these snatches of memory they're having are things that actually happened or things they dreamt up in an alcohol-fogged stupor. Honestly, I think the alcoholic narrator is kind of a thriller cliche at this point, started by the popularity of books like The Girl on the Train or The Woman in the Window. I think it's a little bit tired, but that's just my opinion. Let me know what you think in the comments. Sometimes you also see narrators in thrillers who are struggling with mental illness. Now, this could potentially be an offensive trope, or it could be subverted in some instances. But regardless, things like alcoholism or mental health issues could make a narrator unreliable because it is potentially distorting their own perception of reality. Likewise, if you had a narrator who is struggling with amnesia, such as the heroine in Stay Awake by Megan Golden, they also may become unreliable because since they've lost their memory, they have to put the pieces together, and they may make assumptions that later turn out not to be true. So those are all examples of reasons that narrators might be unreliable. But let's get to the next point. Why do readers like unreliable narrators? Every reader brings a set of assumptions to a story, whether they realize they're doing it or not. And I think one of the key assumptions that most readers have is that they can trust that what the narrator is telling them is the truth. There is a sort of implicit trust between the reader and the narrator. After all, whether the story is told in first person or third person, your narrator is your window to the story, and they are going to affect your perception of events. I mean, to go back to the Hunger Games example, wouldn't the Hunger Games books be very different if Peeta was the narrator instead of Katniss? And wouldn't they be so much more different if the narrator was someone like President Snow? You'd be getting an entirely different story. A reader is seeing the story through the eyes of the narrator, and therefore you are seeing the things that the narrator is presenting you with. When that implicit trust between reader and narrator is violated, it can lead to a really satisfying twist, assuming it is done well. Even today, when I see unreliable narrator mysteries and thrillers come out, I see so many people who are genuinely shocked when they find out that the narrator can't be trusted. Because even after a century of unreliable narrators in fiction, so many people will still not consider the narrator to be a suspect. And even if the narrator themselves is not the killer, it can still set up a very satisfying plot twist. Because if the narrator tells you certain facts, such as this character is manipulative, or these two characters hate each other, when you find out that's not the case, it can be very surprising because you took the narrator's words at face value. However, note here that I'm saying an unreliable narrator can lead to amazing twists when they're done well, because there are many ways to write an unreliable narrator that are just not playing fair with your reader. So let's get to the tips for writing unreliable narrators. And one of the biggest and most important tips is do not lie to your reader. When you are writing an unreliable narrator, you have to be very careful and very intentional with your word choice. I personally believe that mysteries should be fair play. If not a single one of your readers correctly guessed the ending, that means you did not give them enough information and did not foreshadow your story properly. People who are intelligent readers should be able to put the pieces together. And of course, you want to make your mystery difficult to solve, but if literally not a single person can solve it, that means that the mystery you wrote wasn't as effective. There is a difference between being surprised, but being able to look back in hindsight and see all the clues you missed, versus being surprised because the author totally blindsided you with something that there were no hints to. So if your unreliable narrator lies to the reader directly, and your reveal hinges on information they did not have, then it can come across as cheating. You want to give readers a fair shake at solving your book, and so instead of telling the reader outright lies, you want to tell them things that can easily be misinterpreted. There is also a big difference between having your narrator lie to other characters versus lying to the reader. If the narrator is lying to other characters and the reader believes them, that was an assumption on the reader's part. So, for an example, perhaps your narrator says in a line of dialogue to the cops, "I was at the church when the murder occurred." You may then later find out that your narrator was lying to the cops and actually has no alibi because they are the killer. That is totally fair because your narrator is not lying directly to the reader. They're lying to the cops. However, if your unreliable narrator says in narration, "I was innocent, I was at the church when the murder occurred," and you're saying this directly to the reader, when the reader finds out that no, they actually were the murderer, they're going to think to themselves, "But you told me you had an alibi. That wasn't true." Do you kind of see the small difference there? In one scenario, yes, your narrator is lying, but they're not lying to the reader. They're lying to other characters in the story. In the other scenario, you're just deliberately cheating and telling your reader things that aren't true. If your narrator speaks directly to the readers and tells them, "I'm telling the truth, honest," that could potentially come across as cheating. I think the best way to misdirect your readers with an unreliable narrator is to withhold information and manipulate. Instead of directly telling your reader something that isn't true, tell them something that could easily be misinterpreted, or something that is only half true. That way, it'll be more satisfying when the truth is revealed, because your reader will be able to look back on that moment and they will feel like it is their fault for not seeing through it, because technically you didn't lie. You just chose your words very carefully. There is a very famous Agatha Christie book that shall remain nameless, in which the narrator is unreliable. And at the time, because the unreliable narrator hadn't been done before, many readers felt like they'd been cheated. But actually, Agatha Christie never lied to the readers. She just chose her words very carefully, and they made false assumptions, which were later proven not to be true. There is a very famous line in this book that goes like, "I did what little needed to be done." Now, in this scene, the murder has just occurred, so the reader is naturally going to assume that the narrator is talking about notifying the loved ones, calling the police, things like that. The things that you would do if your friend was just murdered and you needed to get the police here. But what the narrator actually means when they say, "I did what little needed to be done," is, I did what little needed to be done to cover up my own crime. So it's not a lie, it's just a deliberately misleading statement that most people are going to interpret in the former way versus the latter. And remember how I said earlier that every reader comes into a story with some key assumptions? Well, my next tip for writing your unreliable narrator is prey on those key assumptions. Think about the things that your reader is going to come into your book believing. There are certain integral beliefs that they are going to come into the story with, one of which is the narrator is telling the truth. Other key assumptions that readers have when they pick up a mystery novel is the death was a murder. After all, it is called a murder mystery. They might assume that the love interest can be trusted, or the police figure. They also might have biases about what type of person a murderer is. There are some character types that seem more trustworthy than others. For example, if your character is a very loving and caring grandma, people might think that she seems like a nice and innocent person, so they would be very surprised when you reveal that she's actually the cold-blooded killer. If you know what preconceived notions your reader is bringing to your book, you can then manipulate them by preying on those assumptions. And another important thing to remember when you're writing an unreliable narrator is that you have to start with trust. If you want your reader to feel a real sense of betrayal, they need to trust and believe in the narrator first. If your narrator comes across like they're withholding something or like they're being suspicious all along, then when you reveal their unreliability, it's not going to have the same desired impact. Because in order for there to be a betrayal, there has to be trust first. I hope that this video has given you a better understanding of unreliable narrators and how they work. Do let me know in the comment section what mystery tropes you would like to see me tackle in future episodes of this series, and make sure to subscribe to my channel so you don't miss the next episode. You can comment a purple heart emoji down below if you want to show your support, and if you didn't watch the previous episode in this series on closed circle mysteries, the link is right here for you to watch. Thank you so much for being here today, and I hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. I'll see you in the next video.